few years back, I remember facilitating a retreat for parishioners from a number of different churches. And the theme of the retreat was Christian discipleship. And I remember that I started off with a question. There were about 30 people there. The question was this: how many people here, and you can think about this yourself, you don't have to do the show of hands like I asked them, but how many people here consider yourself a follower of Jesus Christ? Well, everybody raised their hand. The very fact that they were coming to a retreat with something extra to grow spiritually certainly showed they wanted to be that. And then I asked the follow-up question: how many people here consider yourself a committed and consistent follower of Jesus Christ? Well, very few hands went up there, and a couple hands went halfway up. I remember and somebody asking, well, what does it mean to be committed and consistent? Well, what do you see? You know, committed, yeah, Jesus is the focus of your life and your decision. Consistent, day in and day out. Well, those people put their hand down too, you know, because all of us, we can look at that. Wow, that's a high ideal, to be a committed and consistent follower of Jesus Christ every day, in every circumstance. And I know as we talked about that, we certainly made the point that, hey, the disciples, even the followers of Jesus, tried to be that way, but they fell short. We know that often they argued about who was more important and who was going to be at Jesus' right hand and left hand. And we certainly know at the time of Jesus' crucifixion, they abandoned him. And then even after Pentecost and the Spirit came, Paul in one of his letters said, you know, I don't do what I know I should do, and I do what I know I shouldn't do. And so kind of mentioning that yeah, none of us are going to do it perfectly. At the same time, and remember we discussed this, there's a caution. Because we could hear that, you know, God is merciful and God is understanding. We could hear that in a way that keeps us from really fervently trying to be a committed and consistent follower of Jesus Christ. It can be easy to make an excuse, especially in our time. Well, I'm only human and we're all going to fall short. That's true. But where it becomes an excuse, that we all have to look at. And I want to go and spend some time in the gospel today, because I think the gospel that we have can give us pause for reflection, as all the scriptures can. We should, all of us, whether it's a homily on the weekend or in our daily lives, be looking at scripture and saying, Lord, what do I need to hear in this scripture? Maybe I need to hear you're merciful and understanding. On the other hand, maybe I need to hear you call us to be committed and dedicated daily to you. And this gospel, in Luke's gospel, this is a whole shift from the earlier passages of the first 8 chapters of Luke. This is the 9th chapter. Because there, Jesus is spending his time in Galilee, among friends and relatives, and healing people and preaching powerfully, and many drawn to him in the Galilean region. But now it says this: when the days for Jesus being taken up were fulfilled, he resolutely determined to journey to Jerusalem. What's being said here at this point, his whole fulfillment is ultimately to go into Jerusalem. And we know he was aware of it. He told his disciples, they didn't know at the time, to show his dedication to his Father's will, to doing what is right and good and loving, even though he would go to the cross. He still went forward anyway. As it says, he resolutely determined to journey. How resolute and how determined are we when we may see circumstances in front of us that are uncomfortable or difficult or demanding? Do we go forward? And do we see that's what Jesus asks of us? And in a sense, encourages us and challenges us to be a determined people in what we believe about him and how we live our faith. One quick example, I remember a woman coming to me to talk about her relationship with her mother. And by the way, I want to say this right away. This is not somebody from this parish, okay? because sometimes people say, I'm always trying to figure that out. Or I've had people say, were you talking about me? I didn't even know your life. You know, if it spoke to you, so be it. But anyway, this woman her mother was around 90 years old and in the nursing home. And this woman was sharing with me, it kind of conflicted because her mother, she would go to the nursing home, and her mother at this point in her life was becoming pretty negative and pretty judgmental and not very happy person to be around. And as this woman shared with me, she said, you know, I started going to that nursing home less and less. I kind of thought, hey, you know, I got a busy life and so much is going on and hitting at me. I mean, she's in the nursing home. She's okay. And so her visits became more rare. But then as she shared her spiritual journey with me, she said that somehow, and I don't remember the specific detail, but it was a God moment, my language, a God moment in which she really heard the Lord basically say, hey, your mother put up with you when you were a baby, put up with you when you were a teenager, put up with your negativity, put up with your bad mouth, put up with all of that when you were younger. Can you now do the same for her? Wow. This really hit this woman. And she realized that in her case, she was making excuses. Yes, for some of us, there may be toxic relationships that we can't connect with, that are unhealthy. But here, it wasn't that. Yes, mom was going through a lot. But her mom also appreciated her visits, even if she simply listened and mom had a chance to vent. And so this woman, again, became more determined. Hey, I'm a follower of Jesus. My mom taught me the faith in the first place, and part of what it means is to be committed to her, even if it's uncomfortable, even if it's demanding, to love all the more, to follow the way of Jesus, the path of sacrificial love. One example. Just one more example I want to look at as we from the scripture. So, Jesus is determined. He's headed to Jerusalem. Then it says, on the way, they entered a Samaritan village to prepare for his reception there. But they would not welcome him because the destination of his journey was Jerusalem. You probably heard this before. The Jews and the Samaritans hated each other in many ways, even though they were two nations right next to each other. And the situation went back 800 years, 8th century BC. What had happened was when many of the Jews were sent into exile in Assyria, that many of them intermarried Assyrians, and then when they were able to come back, they came back. But now the Jews who intermarried had mixed blood. And those who stayed pure and came back were still pure Jews. And so, again, hostility and resentment on both sides. And recognizing that kind of sense of, here are people, yes, we share something similar, but they became hostile, they became violent, they became negative with one another, very judgmental. And they had a huge religious difference. The religious difference, the Jews believed that God's presence was most of all to be worshiped at the temple. And that's the heart of our Jewish faith. The Samaritans didn't see it that way. For them, they saw the primary worship of God was at Mount Horeb, which in a different name had been the place where Moses received the Ten Commandments and passed them on. Again, huge religious difference about where to worship. So one more reason to be hostile toward one another, to say, you don't have the true religion, we do. What's wrong with you? Why don't you see it our way? And that's why a lot of times Jesus, we don't realize how radical it was, but when he spoke of the story of the Good Samaritan to a Jewish community and pointed out the priest and the Levite walked by and the Good Samaritan did the right thing, that was hard for them to hear. Wait a second, they're our enemy. They don't even worship the right way. And of course, another time where he listens to the Samaritan woman at the well who had been married 5 times, he doesn't say, well, I'm a Jew and you're a Samaritan. We're not talking. No, he talked, he listened, he touched her life. He brought her a sense of love and not his hostility and judgmentalism. And as we look at that, we can see that Jesus still had to work on his own disciples, because when the Samaritans would not welcome him, when the disciples, James and John, saw this, they asked, Lord, do you want us to call down fire from heaven to consume them? Yeah, you know how they are. Probably figuring, hey, the Lord would say, yeah, look, they didn't welcome me. Let's give it to them. But no, Jesus simply turns and rebukes them, and they journey to another village. All of us need to look at that, a living word in our time. Certainly we live in which there's different ethnicities, different races, different religions, different moral and political perspectives. We know it. And in our day, even in our own country and around the world, there tends to be greater hostility. Certainly, as people of faith, we're called to have conviction and to proclaim our convictions, especially on reverence for all of life, from the unborn to natural death, and all those various situations. At the same time, we're not called to do it with hostility. We're not called to do it with making fun of people. We're not called to do it to mock people, to talk behind their back, and to assume anybody who sees anything different than we not only must be wrong, but must be vile, must be self-centered, must be ungodly. We can't know that. We can judge an action. But too often in our time, we're judging the people themselves, and especially because they don't see it the way we do. And to believe that, as Scripture says, and Jesus spoke with great conviction, yes, to do that, not to compromise that. And Scripture says, St. Paul in another letter says, to speak the truth in love. That's the key. That's fundamental. We can have some understanding of the truth, and also maybe know there's truths we can learn from other people when we listen and open up our hearts. But whatever we do, to speak the truth in love. And we know in our culture today, that's not happening very well. And we need to see that, not get caught up in it ourselves. But as followers of Jesus Christ, in any conversation or situation, if we see that, again, to make the point, yes, we can have our convictions, and we need to share them in love. We don't need to put down other people, judge them in a harsh, negative light. If anything, if there's people we differ with, we need to pray for them. And pray in our country and world today that we can share those convictions in a loving way. So, take a moment and see maybe in all of this what you needed to hear. And I will give one final P.S. because a woman asked me last night, I didn't like that passage where Jesus says to follow, and the guy says, Lord, let me go first and bury my father. Oh, let the dead bury their dead. She thought that was awful. Well, if you hear it one way, it is. Quickly think, even there, Jesus often made strong points, overstated points, to make the point. But in addition, in that day, a lot of times the father may not be dead yet, but the person, hey, if I stay here, I'll get my father's inheritance whenever he dies. So I think I'm just going to stay here and not follow you. So the point being there too, Jesus is not calling us to impossibility or calling us to hate our family. But he is calling us in all circumstances powerfully to put him first. So take that quiet moment. Where do you and I need to be a little more committed and consistent in daily life, following the way of Jesus Christ? God bless you.